series on cycles in nature. Our first question is, how does matter move among the living and non-living parts of an ecosystem? The cycles in ecosystems are called biogeochemical cycles. Let's see. Bio as in life, geo as in the earth, and chemical as in, well, chemicals. So the biogeochemical cycles are when elements, compounds, and other forms of matter are passed from one organism to another and form one part of the biosphere, in other words, where all the living things live, to another. The biogeochemical cycles connect biological, that's where the bio comes from, geological, in other words, things having to do with the earth, with the ground, with our rocks, etc., geological, and chemical aspects. So the most, I guess famous cycle that you are already familiar with is the hydrologic cycle or the water cycle. I'm going to put hydrologic in parentheses here so you know that that's the fancy way of saying it. Hydrologic cycle. And so this one, again, you should be pretty familiar with. We have areas of water. There's a little pond. And we know that evaporation happens. So evaporation is when liquid water turns into a gas form. And when it then comes together, that process is called condensation. And that's when we see clouds forming in the atmosphere. Then, of course, as the clouds condense, they then release the water in the form of precipitation. And precipitation can mean can mean rain, or it can be snow, or it can be hail. Precipitation. Let me zoom in a little bit. Okay, precipitation. So you should all be pretty familiar with that part, but one part that some people are not as familiar with is what's happening with plants. So here we'll put a nice little tree, and here under the ground are the tree's roots, and the trees are going to take up some of the water, so we'll call that root uptake And then the water moves up through the xylem and phloem. I'm sorry, not through the phloem, through the xylem only. The water moves up through the xylem to the plants, and it goes to the leaves. Well, some of that excess water actually leaves the stoma of the leaves and comes out through a process called transpiration. So plants themselves are responsible for putting some of that water back into the water cycle. And water is constantly moving between the atmosphere and the earth. It never goes away. Now there are other cycles that are very important to all of our living things, and one of those is the carbon cycle. We have the water cycle. Let's write the carbon cycle next. You might remember from earlier units this year that carbon is one of the most important elements in the human body and in the body of all living things. Carbon plays many roles, and there are four main processes that move carbon. I'm just going to give it C for carbon. That's the atomic letter. The first is biological processes. Such as photosynthesis, that takes the carbon dioxide in and turns it into sugar, glucose. Respiration, that happens in all cells when the glucose is turned back into carbon dioxide. And decomposition. Everything that breaks down turns into carbon dioxide, but also into methane, which is another carbon compound. There are also geochemical processes, such as erosion, which is breaking down the carbon compounds in rocks, and volcanic activity. A lot of that gas that is released has carbon in it. It releases CO2, carbon dioxide. There is also burial and decomposition. Of dead organisms. And their conversion under pressure. So a lot of times people say that when you put gas in your car, you're putting dead dinosaur in there. That's not actually very true. Fossil fuels are called fossil fuels because they're made from the remains of dead organisms, but most of the petroleum that we use to make into gasoline is actually from dead plants that lived millions and millions of years ago. And as they got buried and put under pressure, they turned into fossil fuels. The same thing for coal. Coal is another fossil fuel. Going along with this is mining, and then also cutting and burning of forests. And burning of the fossil fuels. So when we take out coal, for example, when we cut down and burn forests, when we burn gasoline and coal, we are releasing carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Another really important cycle is the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen is really important in proteins and also in DNA, so it's super important for us. The atmosphere is the main reserve of nitrogen. Is the main reservoir of nitrogen. I'm going to give it just the letter N, that's its atomic symbol. And it also cycles through the soil and tissues of living things. And we're going to play a little game about this in class so you'll kind of see exactly where the nitrogen travels. And then finally, the phosphorus cycle. Phosphorus is found in ATP, that's the P in ATP, and it's found in DNA, so it's super important to living cells as well. Phosphorus in the biosphere cycles among the land, ocean, ocean sediments, which means all the stuff at the bottom. There's no comma there. Ocean sediments and living organisms. This one is it's different than the carbon cycle because you don't really see this as in something you burn, but it is used a lot in fertilizer. So that's how humans take it out of certain rocks, especially those that can be near that were formed in the bottom of the ocean, and they use the phosphorus for fertilizers. So we're going to do some activities on this side to help you review what happens through each cycle. So go ahead and copy all of this down for your notes on the cycles of nature.